Emma Harrington's trembling hands cradled her swollen belly as she faced 7 towering bearded strangers in the abandoned ghost town where she'd come to hide her shame and give birth alone. The giant brothers who blocked her escape would either become her worst nightmare or her only salvation in a world that had already condemned her and her unborn child. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Emma Harrington clutched her small leather suitcase as the stagecoach rattled and swayed beneath her. The other passengers had disembarked at the last proper town, leaving her alone for the final stretch of her journey. The driver had warned her there was nothing left at Redemption, just a ghost town forgotten by time and abandoned by all but the most desperate souls. Perfect, she had thought. That's exactly what I need. Her free hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly, 6 months along now and impossible to hide. The gold band on her finger caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the dusty window, a prop, nothing more. There was no husband, had never been one. Just a trusted colleague who had become something more during long evenings grading papers together at the boarding house. Professor James Whitaker, with his kind eyes and gentle hands, who had promised to marry her before the influenza took him 3 months ago, leaving Emma alone with their growing child and a reputation in tatters. She had endured the whispers at first, the sidelong glances from townspeople who had once greeted her warmly, the stern lecture from the school board about moral standards expected of teachers. When the letter arrived demanding her resignation for the good of the children, Emma had sold what she could, packed what little remained, and purchased a ticket to the most remote location she could find on the map. "Redemption ahead, ma'am," the driver called down, his voice nearly lost in the thunder of hooves and the creak of wheels. "Last chance to change your mind. Nothing out here but dust and ghosts." "I'll be fine, thank you," she replied, summoning what remained of her schoolteacher's authority. The man shrugged. He had tried to warn her, his expression said, and returned his attention to the trail ahead. The stagecoach crested a small rise and Redemption appeared below them, a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to the harsh landscape like stubborn survivors. The town had sprung up around a silver mine that had promised fortune, but delivered only enough to keep hope alive for a decade, before finally running dry. When the mine closed, most folks had packed up and left. Those who remained had gradually followed, until Redemption became another footnote in the story of Western expansion, a place of broken dreams and abandoned ambitions. Or so Emma had been told. As the stagecoach drew closer, she noticed something curious. Thin ribbons of smoke rising from a few chimneys. A horse hitched outside what had once been a general store. Signs of life where there should have been none. The coach rolled to a stop in what had once been the town square, dust billowing around them before settling on weathered boardwalks and sun-bleached storefronts. "This is as far as I go, ma'am," the driver said, jumping down to retrieve her luggage. "Stage won't be back through for 2 weeks, if you're still minded to be here." Emma stepped down carefully, one hand supporting her belly, the other gripping the driver's reluctantly offered arm. Her sensible shoes touched the packed earth of Redemption's main street, and she took a moment to steady herself after the long journey. "The old schoolhouse is that way," the driver said, pointing toward a small building at the edge of town. "Roof might still be good, better than sleeping under the stars anyway." "Thank you," Emma said, pressing a small coin into the man's palm. He tipped his hat, climbed back onto his perch, and with a sharp whistle and crack of reins, the stagecoach was moving again, leaving her alone in the empty street. Or not quite alone. The hair on the back of Emma's neck prickled as she felt eyes upon her. Turning slowly, she found herself facing the bat-wing doors of what had once been a saloon. A man stood there. No, not just a man. The largest human being Emma had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad as an axe handle and arms thick as fence posts. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a heavy beard and eyes that studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Been a while since the stage dropped anyone here," he said, his deep voice carrying across the empty street. "Especially a woman in your condition." Emma straightened her spine, summoning the posture that had helped her control classrooms full of unruly children. "I'm the new teacher," she said, the lie coming easily after weeks of rehearsal. "I was told the town needed education for its children." A sound came from the saloon behind the giant man, something between a snort and a laugh. The big man turned slightly, revealing another figure behind him. Then another appeared in the doorway of the general store. Two more emerged from what had been the blacksmith's. Within moments, Emma found herself surrounded by 7 men, all cut from the same enormous cloth, tall, broad, powerful, with the same dark hair and beard in varying lengths. Brothers, clearly, with the kind of family resemblance that couldn't be mistaken. "No children in redemption," said one of them, younger than the first, but no less imposing. "Just us," added another. Emma felt her carefully constructed story crumbling around her. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase, and she fought the urge to back away. These were exactly the sort of men she had been warned about all her life. Rough frontiersmen, isolated from civilization and its tempering influences. "I see," she said, struggling to keep her voice even. "I appear to have been misinformed. I'll just wait for the next stage then." 2 weeks, rumbled the first brother, whom Emma was beginning to recognize as the eldest. "You aim to sleep in the street till then?" Before she could answer, a sharp pain knifed through her abdomen. Not the baby, but hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning, too nauseated by the stage's constant jostling to manage more than a few bites of bread. The world swam before her eyes, and she reached instinctively for support, finding nothing but air as her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The eldest brother had moved with surprising speed for a man his size. Up close, his face was not as fierce as she had first thought. Weathered by sun and wind, yes, but with eyes that showed concern rather than threat. "Joshua," he barked to one of the others, "get her water. Elijah, clear a space in the store. Matthew, find something she can eat." Emma found herself being carried as easily as a child, cradled against a chest broad as a barrel. "I don't even know your name," she murmured, fighting to stay conscious. "Abraham Crane," he replied, "and those are my brothers. We own what's left of redemption." The cool dimness of the general store enveloped her as Abraham ducked through the doorway. He set her gently on a chair that another brother, Elijah, she presumed, had pulled forward. "Why did you really come here, ma'am?" Abraham asked, his voice quieter now. "Truth this time. There's nothing in redemption for a woman like you." Emma looked at the 7 faces surrounding her, all variants of the same strong features, all watching her with the same intensity. These men might be her salvation or her doom. Either way, she had nowhere else to go. "My name is Emma Harrington," she said, deciding that truth was her only option now. "I was a teacher in Silver Creek until they discovered my condition. The father is gone. I have no family, no prospects, and nowhere that will accept a woman in my circumstances. I came to redemption because I heard it was abandoned, and I thought—" Her voice faltered. "I thought I could have my child in peace, away from judging eyes, and decide what to do after." The brothers exchanged glances, some communication passing between them that Emma couldn't interpret. Finally, Abraham spoke again. "We've been trying to bring this town back to life for 3 years now," he said. "Bought the land for almost nothing after the mine closed. Been rebuilding bit by bit. Could use a teacher as it happens. Not for children, not yet, anyway. But for us." "For you?" Emma repeated, confused. "None of us had much schooling," explained one of the younger brothers. Matthew, she thought. Can barely write our names, some of us. Hard to build a town when you can't read contracts or write letters, Abraham added. We've been taking turns riding to Coopersville for help with such matters, but it's 3 days' journey each way. Emma looked around at the brothers again, understanding dawning. These weren't the dangerous outcasts she had feared, but men with a dream, rebuilding a ghost town into something living again. You're offering me a position? She asked cautiously. Room and board at the hotel. We've fixed up 3 rooms so far, Abraham said. Meals, protection. His eyes flickered to her belly. A safe place for your child to be born. In exchange, you teach us what we need to know. It wasn't the solitude she had sought, but perhaps it was something better. A purpose, security, and 7 very large reasons for anyone to think twice before bothering her. I accept, Emma said, and for the first time in months, she felt the knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. She had found redemption after all, just not in the way she had expected. Abraham led Emma to the hotel at dusk, carrying her suitcase in one massive hand as if it weighed nothing. The faded sign above the entrance read, Redemption Grand Hotel, though there was nothing particularly grand about the weathered 2-story building. Still, as they stepped inside, Emma was surprised by the care evident in its restoration. The floors had been swept clean, broken windows replaced, and a comfortable-looking settee positioned near a stone fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully. Elijah's the craftsman, Abraham explained, noticing her appraising gaze. Fixed up this place first, so we'd have somewhere proper to sleep. It's lovely, Emma said sincerely. After weeks of dreading what shelter she might find in an abandoned town, the hotel's humble comforts seemed luxurious. Your room's upstairs, first door on the right. Best one in the place, gets the morning sun and has its own washroom. Matthew's bringing your supper up shortly. As if summoned by his name, the second youngest brother appeared, balancing a tray laden with a steaming bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a cup of tea. His enormous hands made the dishware look like doll furniture. Ma'am, he said with a nod, the hint of a blush visible beneath his beard. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. Thank you, Matthew, and please call me Emma. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a shy smile. Yes, ma'am. Emma, I mean. Abraham showed her to her room, which was indeed the nicest accommodation she'd had since leaving Silver Creek. A proper bed with clean linens, a small writing desk, a rocking chair by the window, and a washroom with an actual bathtub. Luxuries she hadn't dared hope for. We'll leave you to rest, Abraham said, setting her suitcase beside the bed. Any concerns? I'm in the room at the end of the hall. After they departed, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She had arrived expecting emptiness, and instead found 7 enormous men who seemed determined to rebuild a ghost town through sheer force of will. More surprisingly, they had welcomed her, a stranger in delicate circumstances, without judgment. The stew was delicious, hearty with chunks of venison and vegetables. As she ate, Emma planned her first lessons, mentally cataloging what she would need. The brothers clearly required different levels of instruction, and she would have to assess each one's abilities. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found a younger brother, not Matthew, but similar in appearance, though his beard was shorter and his eyes a warmer brown. Begging your pardon, Miss Emma. I'm Gideon, 5th born, he said, extending a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Thought you might need these. Found them in the old schoolhouse. Inside the package were chalk, a small slate, and several battered primers, basic reading materials she could use to begin their education. This is perfect, Gideon. Thank you. His broad face lit up at her approval. Happy to help. Anything else you need, just ask. The next morning, Emma woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and bacon. Dressing carefully in one of her few remaining dresses that still accommodated her growing belly, she made her way downstairs to find all 7 brothers already seated around a large table. They rose as one when she entered, a forest of towering men suddenly at attention. "Good morning," she said, momentarily taken aback by their collective presence. In the light of day, their family resemblance was even more striking, all dark-haired and bearded, with the same strong jaw and broad shoulders, though each had distinctive features that set them apart. Abraham, the eldest, had silver threading through his beard and a scar across his right eyebrow. Joshua, second-born, was slightly taller with harder eyes. Elijah, third in line, had the most skilled hands and gentlest demeanor. Matthew's smile came easiest, while Gideon had a thoughtful quality about him. The 2 youngest, Emma hadn't caught their names yet, seemed barely out of their 20s despite their impressive size. "Miss Emma, these are my remaining brothers," Abraham said, gesturing to the youngest pair, Daniel and Caleb. Daniel nodded solemnly while Caleb offered a dimpled smile that transformed his rugged face. All biblical names, Emma noted. Someone had raised these giants with religion, though there was no church visible in redemption. "Pleased to meet you all properly," she said, taking the chair Abraham pulled out for her. "I thought we might begin our lessons this morning, if that suits everyone." "Already cleared out the old meeting hall," Joshua said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Seemed the best place." After breakfast, they showed her to a building just off the main street. As promised, it had been swept clean, with a large table assembled from multiple smaller ones pushed together at its center. 7 chairs of varying styles surrounded it, with a sturdier one placed at the head, clearly meant for her. "First, I need to understand what each of you already knows," Emma said, slipping easily into her teacher's role. "Who can read?" Abraham, Elijah, and Gideon raised their hands. "Right?" Only Abraham and Gideon this time. "Numbers?" All but Caleb, who shrugged good-naturedly. "Never had the knack for figuring." Emma nodded, mentally grouping them by ability. "We'll start with reading for those who need it, while the others can begin with writing exercises. I'd like to understand your specific needs as well. What sort of reading and writing will be most useful in rebuilding redemption?" "Contracts," Abraham said immediately. "Land deeds, purchase agreements." "Letters to suppliers," added Elijah. "We need materials we can't make ourselves." "Maps and measurements," Joshua contributed, "for plotting new buildings." Emma wrote these down on her slate. "Very practical needs. We'll focus our lessons accordingly." For the next 3 hours, she worked with them in groups. Despite their size and rough appearance, the Crane brothers proved to be attentive students. Even Joshua, whose perpetual scowl had initially intimidated her, applied himself with surprising concentration to forming his letters. By midday, Emma was exhausted, but pleased with their progress. These men might have limited formal education, but they possessed sharp minds and determination. As they broke for lunch, Abraham lingered behind. "You're a good teacher," he said, helping her gather the materials. "Patient. Your brothers are good students, eager to learn. We had a mother who valued learning, though she died before she could teach us much beyond our letters. Father tried, but he was more concerned with teaching us to survive." It was the first personal information any of them had volunteered, and Emma sensed the significance of Abraham sharing it. "Where is your father now?" she asked gently. "Passed 5 winters ago. Pneumonia took him." Abraham's face remained impassive, but something in his voice spoke of deep loss. "Left the 7 of us to finish what he started." "Which is?" "Building something that lasts." He gestured toward the window, where Redemption's main street was visible. "This town died once. We aim to make sure it doesn't happen again." Emma found herself touched by their dedication. That's an admirable goal. Not everyone thinks so. A shadow crossed Abraham's face. "The Harlow brothers over in Coopersville have been trying to run us off since we arrived. Want this land for grazing their cattle. Is that a concern?" Emma instinctively placed a hand on her belly, the protective gesture not lost on Abraham. "Nothing for you to worry about. We can handle the Harlows." But something in his tone suggested the conflict was more serious than he was letting on. Before she could press further, the other brothers returned, and the moment for private conversation passed. That evening, as Emma sat in her rocking chair watching the sunset paint Redemption's weathered buildings in gold, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been a respectable teacher in a proper town. Now she was living in a ghost town with 7 enormous brothers, carrying a child with no father, teaching grown men their letters. Yet somehow, for the first time since James's death, she felt something like hope. These men, with their biblical names and improbable dreams, had offered her something precious: purpose and protection, when she most needed both. Outside her window, she could hear the brothers' deep voices as they worked into the evening, hammering and sawing, rebuilding what had been abandoned, much like they were helping her rebuild her own life, one careful piece at a time. By the end of her first week in Redemption, Emma had established a routine. Mornings were devoted to teaching, with the brothers rotating attendance based on their work schedules. Afternoons she spent preparing lessons or helping with lighter tasks around town. The physical limitations of her pregnancy meant she couldn't contribute much labor to the rebuilding efforts, but she found other ways to make herself useful, organizing supplies, keeping accounts, and planning future improvements. She learned quickly that each brother had his specialties. Abraham handled overall planning and negotiations with outside suppliers. Joshua managed security and hunting, keeping their larder well stocked with game. Elijah could build or repair almost anything, his massive hands surprisingly deft with delicate work. Matthew had a talent for cooking and tending the small garden behind the hotel. Gideon was their historian and record keeper, maintaining their father's journals and maps. Daniel worked with livestock, caring for the handful of horses and 3 milk cows they'd acquired, and Caleb, the youngest at 26, assisted wherever needed, his perpetual good humor making him everyone's favorite companion for tedious tasks. On Sunday morning, Emma woke to the sound of singing. Following the deep harmonies downstairs, she found the brothers gathered in what had once been the hotel's dining room, now serving as an impromptu chapel. Abraham stood at the head, reading from a worn Bible. "Didn't mean to disturb your rest," he said when they noticed her in the doorway. "You didn't," Emma assured him. "May I join you?" The brothers shifted, making space on one of the benches. As Emma settled between Gideon and Matthew, she felt a curious sense of belonging. Their father had clearly raised them with faith, and they had maintained the practice even here in this half-empty town. After the service, as the brothers dispersed to their various tasks, Abraham lingered. "Our mother was religious," he explained unprompted. "Made father promise to raise us with the good book, especially after she knew she was dying." "How old were you?" Emma asked gently. 17. Joshua was 16. Caleb just a baby. Abraham's eyes grew distant. Father did his best with 7 boys and no wife, but some things fell by the wayside. Education was one of them. "Yet you can read," Emma observed. "Mother taught me and Joshua before she passed. I taught Elijah and tried with the others, but there was always so much work." He shook his head. "By the time Father died, we'd all but forgotten her wishes for us to be educated men." The personal revelation touched Emma deeply. These brothers weren't just rebuilding a town, they were fulfilling a promise to parents long gone. "Your mother would be proud of you," she said. "All of you." Abraham's expression softened momentarily, But before he could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. His face immediately hardened as he moved to the window. "Harlows," he said, voice tight. "5 of them." Emma followed his gaze to see riders approaching. Not as large as the Crane brothers, but rough-looking men with a meanness about them even at a distance. "Stay inside," Abraham instructed, already moving toward the door. "Joshua, riders coming in." From various buildings around town, the other brothers emerged, converging on the main street. They formed an imposing barrier, 7 giants standing shoulder to shoulder as the riders approached. Unable to resist, Emma moved to the window, watching as the Harlow brothers dismounted. Their leader, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, stepped forward. "Crane," he called out, "come to deliver a message from our father." "Nothing to discuss, Harlow," Abraham replied, his deep voice carrying easily. "We've been through this." "Circumstances have changed," the man countered, his thin lips twisting in a smile. "We heard you've got a woman in town now. Father says that changes things. A proper town needs proper oversight. Law, order, protection." The last word dripped with insinuation. Emma's breath caught. They knew about her. How, she couldn't guess. Perhaps the stagecoach driver had mentioned her arrival in Coopersville. "The lady is under our protection," Joshua stated, stepping forward to stand beside Abraham. "She doesn't need anything from the Harlows." The Harlow leader laughed. 7 unmarried men and 1 woman living together. That's not protection, that's scandal. What would the territorial governor think about such an arrangement? Might be cause to question your claim on this land. Emma felt a chill. The Harlows were threatening to use her presence against the brothers, twisting it into something indecent that could undermine their legal standing. "Miss Harrington is our teacher," Abraham said evenly, "here on a respectable contract to provide education." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Another Harlow snickered. Emma saw Joshua's hands clench into fists, but Abraham placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. "State your business and be gone, Harlow," Abraham said coldly. "We've work to do. Message is simple. Our father's offering to buy you out. One last time. Fair price for the land and buildings. After that," he shrugged, "things might get complicated, especially for a woman in her condition." The threat was unmistakable. Emma instinctively placed her hand over her belly, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Matthew, who had glanced back toward the hotel. His eyes met hers through the window, concern evident in his expression. "You threaten our teacher, you threaten us," Abraham said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's not a path you want to take, Harlow." The tension crackled between the 2 groups of brothers, neither willing to back down. Finally, the Harlow leader spat in the dirt. "Think about the offer. Father won't wait forever." With that, he and his brothers mounted their horses and rode out, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. When they were gone, Emma stepped onto the hotel porch, still shaken by the confrontation. The Crane brothers turned to her, 7 identical expressions of concern on their bearded faces. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep." "No," Abraham shook his head firmly. "The Harlows have been looking for excuses since we arrived. If not you, they'd find something else. What do they want with redemption? It's hardly a thriving community yet." "Water rights," Elijah explained. "There's an underground spring that feeds the town well, never runs dry even in drought years. The Harlows want it for their cattle operation." "Can they really cause legal problems because of my situation?" Emma asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Not if you're properly employed here," Abraham said thoughtfully. "We should draw up a formal contract, make everything official. And we'll need to finish the schoolhouse," added Gideon. "Give you a proper place to teach." "The Harlows are all talk," Joshua insisted, though his expression suggested he didn't fully believe his own words. That evening, after dinner, Abraham presented Emma with a carefully written contract, outlining her duties as teacher, her compensation, room, board, and a modest salary, and the expected duration of employment, open-ended, with provisions for maternity leave when her time came. "This protects you as much as us," he explained as she read it over, "makes everything proper and legal." Emma signed without hesitation, touched by their concern for her reputation. These men, whom she had initially feared, had become her most steadfast defenders in just 1 week. Later, as she prepared for bed, a soft knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Elijah, his massive frame nearly filling the doorway. "Made something for you," he said, extending a small wooden object. "For protection." It was a beautifully crafted whistle on a leather cord. "Blow this if you ever need us," he said simply. "One of us will always be within hearing distance." As Emma closed her door, the whistle clutched in her palm. She realized that in this half-rebuilt ghost town surrounded by 7 giant brothers, she felt safer than she had in months. The Harlow's threats still lingered, but against the solid wall of protection the Cranes offered, those threats seemed somehow less substantial. That night, for the first time since James died, Emma slept deeply and dreamlessly, the whistle hanging from her bedpost, a tangible reminder that she was no longer alone. The schoolhouse became their most urgent project. What had been a half-collapsed building at the edge of town transformed over the next 2 weeks through the brothers' relentless labor. They replaced the roof, reinforced the walls, installed new windows, and built sturdy furniture. Emma watched in amazement as the 7 giants worked with coordinated efficiency, each knowing his role without needing direction. "Never seen men work so hard for education," she remarked to Abraham as they surveyed the nearly completed building. "Not just for education," he replied quietly. "For legitimacy. The Harlows will have a harder time challenging our claim with a functioning school." Emma understood. The schoolhouse wasn't merely for learning, it was a symbol of redemption's rebirth, a declaration that this was no longer a ghost town but a community with a future. When they finished, the simple 1-room schoolhouse stood as the most immaculate building in Redemption, with a fresh coat of whitewash, green shutters, and even a small bell tower. Inside, Elijah had crafted a teacher's desk with a drawer that locked, a thoughtful touch that brought tears to Emma's eyes when he presented her with the key. "For your private papers," he explained, his weathered face coloring slightly, "and the contracts. Keep them safe." The day they officially opened the schoolhouse, all 7 brothers dressed in their Sunday best, clean shirts, polished boots, and freshly trimmed beards. They sat at desks built for men twice the size of normal schoolchildren, looking both proud and slightly self-conscious as Emma conducted their first proper lesson in the new space. That evening, they surprised her with a celebration dinner. Matthew had outdone himself, preparing venison steaks, potatoes, fresh bread, and even a berry pie made from preserved fruit. As they ate together in the hotel dining room, Emma was struck by how much had changed in just a month. These men had become more than her protectors, they were becoming her family. "A toast," Abraham said, raising his cup, "to Miss Emma, who's brought learning back to Redemption. And to the baby," added Caleb with his easy smile, "our first new citizen." Emma placed a hand on her growing belly, now entering her 7th month. "I can't thank you all enough for what you've done." "We should be thanking you," Gideon said earnestly. "Some of us couldn't even write our own names properly before you came." As the evening wound down, Emma found herself sitting beside Daniel on the hotel porch, enjoying the cool night air. The second youngest brother was normally the quietest of the 7, but tonight he seemed to have something on his mind. "May I ask you something, Miss Emma?" he finally ventured. "Of course, Daniel." "The baby's father," he began, then stopped, clearly uncertain how to continue. "Died of influenza," she supplied gently, "before we could marry." Daniel nodded, relief evident in his expression. Abraham thought as much, but Joshua wondered if maybe you were running from someone who'd hurt you. Emma was touched by their concern. "No, nothing like that. James was a good man, a professor at the school where I taught. We were planning to announce our engagement when the sickness took him." Daniel absorbed this information silently, then said, "Our mother died in childbirth with Caleb." The simple statement carried such weight that Emma felt her heart constrict. "I'm so sorry. Father never blamed Caleb, but he was never the same after. Made us promise we'd always look after each other. That's why," he hesitated, "that's why we worry about you, about what's coming." Emma understood then why the brothers watched her so carefully, why they insisted she rest frequently and eat well. They had witnessed the worst outcome of childbirth, and their mother's death had shaped them profoundly. "I'm healthy," she assured him, "and when the time comes, we'll send for the midwife from Coopersville." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Just be careful, Miss Emma. We've come to rely on you." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. She had come to redemption expecting solitude, perhaps even hardship, but instead had found 7 champions who valued her not just for what she could teach them, but for herself. 2 days later, the stagecoach returned to Redemption for the first time since Emma's arrival. She had half expected to be its only passenger again, but to her surprise, a middle-aged woman in practical traveling clothes descended after the driver. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the woman introduced herself briskly when Emma greeted her. "Heard there was a pregnant woman living in a ghost town with 7 men. Thought I'd better see for myself." Emma blinked in surprise. "A female doctor?" "Trained in Boston," Dr. Jenkins replied, adjusting her spectacles. "Been practicing in the territory for 15 years. The stagecoach driver mentioned your situation when he came through Silverton. I decided to make a detour." By then, Abraham and Joshua had arrived, eyeing the newcomer warily. "The lady is our teacher," Abraham said, his tone protective. "She's well cared for." Dr. Jenkins sized up the enormous man without a trace of intimidation. "I'm sure she is, Mr. Crane, Abraham Crane." "Well, Mr. Crane, even with the best care, a woman in her condition needs proper medical attention, unless you've delivered many babies." Abraham's stern expression faltered. "No, ma'am." "Then you'll be glad I'm here." She turned back to Emma. "When are you due, my dear?" "About 8 weeks, I think." The doctor nodded. "Perfect timing, then. I can examine you today and return closer to your time." The brothers exchanged glances, then Abraham nodded. "She can use the schoolhouse for privacy." As the doctor examined her in the tidy schoolroom, Emma explained her circumstances, James's death, her dismissal, finding refuge with the Crane brothers. 7 unmarried men taking in a pregnant teacher, Dr. Jenkins mused, measuring Emma's belly. "It's unusual, certainly, but not the strangest arrangement I've seen on the frontier." "They've been nothing but respectful," Emma assured her. "I believe you. The big one, Abraham, looks at you like you're made of china." The doctor smiled. "The baby's growing well. Strong heartbeat. You're healthy, though I'd like you to rest more as you enter these final weeks." "The brothers say the same thing," Emma admitted. "They've been extraordinarily protective." "Good, you'll need that." Dr. Jenkins packed her instruments. "I'm staying in Coopersville for the next month. I'll return in 4 weeks to check on you again, then stay until the baby comes." The news brought Emma immense relief. Having a doctor present for the birth addressed her greatest fear. As Dr. Jenkins prepared to leave, she paused. "Those men seem devoted to you. particularly the eldest. "They're kind to everyone," Emma said quickly, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. The doctor gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, my dear." That evening, as Emma sat in her rocking chair, she reflected on the doctor's words. Had Abraham been looking at her differently? She had been so focused on her pregnancy, on establishing the school, on the threat from the Harlows, that she hadn't considered the possibility of deeper feelings developing. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Abraham, holding a small wooden cradle. "Elijah made it," he explained, bringing it inside. "We thought the baby should have a proper place to sleep." The cradle was exquisitely crafted with gentle curves and a smooth rocking motion. Emma ran her fingers over the polished wood, emotion tightening her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "There's something else," Abraham said, his deep voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "The doctor mentioned you should be resting more. We've been thinking, that is, the brothers and I have discussed." "Yes?" Emma prompted when he paused. "We'd like to offer you marriage," he said finally, "to protect you and the child, to give the baby a name." Emma stared at him, speechless. "It wouldn't have to be. That is, we wouldn't expect." Abraham struggled with the words, his face flushing beneath his beard. "It would be a marriage in name only, for propriety's sake. Any of us would be willing. You could choose." The offer was so unexpected, so earnest in its awkwardness, that Emma didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These 7 giants, with their biblical names and gentle hearts, were offering to sacrifice their futures to protect her reputation and her child's. "Abraham," she said gently, "that's incredibly kind, but I couldn't ask any of you to make such a sacrifice, "It wouldn't be a sacrifice," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "Not for me, at least." The implication hung between them, shifting the air in the small room. Before Emma could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouts and the pounding of hooves broke the evening quiet. Abraham moved to the window, his expression hardening. "Harlows," he said grimly. "And this time they've brought their father." Abraham moved to the door, his massive frame blocking the exit. "Stay here," he instructed. "Lock the door behind me." "What's happening?" Emma asked, instinctively placing her hand on her belly. "Nothing we can't handle." But the grim set of his jaw told a different story. As soon as he left, Emma moved to the window. Below, the Harlow brothers were dismounting in the center of town, but this time they were accompanied by an older man on a black stallion. Even from a distance, Emma could see the family resemblance, the same narrow face and calculating eyes. Though the father's hair had gone silver, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man accustomed to getting his way. The 7 Crane brothers converged in the street, forming their now familiar wall of humanity. In the fading light, they looked like ancient warriors, 7 giants standing shoulder to shoulder against an encroaching enemy. Emma opened her window slightly, allowing the voices to drift up to her. "Jeremiah Harlow," Abraham acknowledged, his deep voice carrying clearly. "Been a while." "Not since your father's funeral," the older man replied, his tone falsely genial. "Thought it was time we spoke face to face about this situation." "Nothing to discuss," Joshua said flatly. "This land is ours, fair and legal." Jeremiah Harlow dismounted with the stiff movements of an aging man who refused to acknowledge his limitations. "Let's not be hasty. I've come with a generous offer." "We're not interested in selling," Abraham stated. "You haven't heard the price." Harlow reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. $5,000 for the deed to redemption. That's more than double what this ghost town is worth. A murmur passed through the brothers. It was indeed a substantial sum. "We're not selling," Abraham repeated firmly. Our father spent his last years establishing our claim here. This is our home now." Harlow's false friendliness evaporated. "Your father was a stubborn fool who didn't know when to cut his losses. Don't make the same mistake." Emma saw Joshua step forward menacingly, only to be restrained again by Abraham's steady hand. "My boys tell me you've got a woman living here now," Harlow continued, his gaze sweeping the buildings, as if he could spot Emma through the walls. "A schoolteacher in a delicate condition. Must be difficult for her, all alone out here with 7 unmarried men." "Miss Harrington is under our protection," Abraham said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Protection?" Harlow laughed. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Territorial governor might have some questions about the propriety of such an arrangement." Emma's heart raced. This was the same threat his sons had made, but coming from Jeremiah Harlow, it carried more weight. A man of his apparent standing could indeed cause legal complications if he chose. "You have until the month's end to accept my offer," Harlow said, returning to his horse with the same stiff dignity. "After that, I can't guarantee the safety of your household, especially for a woman in her condition." As the Harlows rode away, Emma closed the window and sank into her rocking chair, Abraham's proposal still echoing in her mind alongside Jeremiah Harlow's threats. Both men, in their own ways, were offering solutions to her vulnerable position, one through marriage, the other through intimidation. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Emma, it's Gideon. Are you all right?" She opened the door to find not just Gideon but all 7 brothers standing in the hallway, their enormous frames making the space seem impossibly small. "We need to talk," Abraham said. "All of us." They gathered in the hotel's dining room, Emma seated at the head of the table with the brothers arranged around her like an honor guard. The wooden cradle stood nearby, a poignant reminder of the stakes. "Harlow's not bluffing," Joshua said grimly. "He's got the governor's ear and enough money to make trouble." "But he can't just take your land, can he?" Emma asked. "You have legal claim." "Legal claims can be challenged," Abraham explained, "especially when the claimants are unconventional." 7 bachelor brothers living with an unmarried pregnant woman, Elijah clarified gently. "In the eyes of society, it's scandalous." "Which brings us back to Abraham's proposal," Matthew said, looking directly at Emma. "Any one of us would be honored to stand as your husband, to protect you and the child from Harlow's schemes." Emma looked around the table at these 7 men who had, in just 1 month, become her protectors, her students, her friends. They were offering to sacrifice their futures for her, an extraordinary gesture that humbled her deeply. "I can't ask that of any of you," she said softly. "You're not asking, we're offering," Caleb replied with his easy smile. "Besides, it's not just for you. The baby deserves a name, a family. And redemption needs you," Gideon added earnestly. "You've brought something back to this place that died with our mother, a sense of home." Emma felt tears threatening. These past months had been a whirlwind of loss and fear, of desperate decisions and uncertain futures. Now, these 7 brothers were offering her something she'd never expected to find in an abandoned mining town: stability, protection, family. "If I were to consider this," she said carefully, "how would it work? Who would—" The brothers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Your choice entirely," Abraham said finally. "Any of us would be honored, but none would presume." The solemnity of the moment was broken by Daniel, who rarely spoke but now cleared his throat. "Though some might hope more than others," he said, his eyes flickering briefly to Abraham. A tide of color rose in Abraham's bearded face, and Emma felt an answering warmth in her own cheeks as their eyes met across the table. There had been moments, small interactions, lingering glances, that suggested his interest might extend beyond simple protection. But Emma had attributed these to her own imagination, to the natural intimacy that developed between people sharing close quarters. "I need time to think," she said finally. "So of course," Abraham nodded, "but Harlow won't give us much. Month's end is only 2 weeks away." That night, sleep eluded Emma. She rocked in her chair by the window, watching the moon rise over Redemption's weathered buildings. Marriage to one of the Crane brothers would solve her most pressing problems. It would give her child legitimacy, secure her position in the community they were building, and neutralize Harlow's threat to their collective reputation. But marriage was meant to be more than a practical arrangement. She had loved James, had imagined a future with him that included not just security, but companionship, affection, partnership. The thought of entering a marriage of convenience, even with the best intentions, felt like surrendering that dream forever. Yet as she considered each brother in turn, her thoughts lingered on Abraham. There was something in his steady presence, his quiet strength, that drew her. From the moment he had caught her when she fainted on that first day, she had felt safe with him in a way she hadn't felt since James died. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Emma?" Abraham's voice came through the door. "I saw your light. Is everything all right?" She opened the door to find him still dressed, as sleepless as she was. "I couldn't rest," she admitted. "Nor I." He hesitated, then asked, "May I come in? Just to talk?" She nodded, suddenly aware of her loosened hair and nightdress covered by a shawl. It wasn't proper, but propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the decisions before her. Abraham sat on the edge of her bed, the only place besides the rocking chair that could support his massive frame. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words between them. "I never expected to marry," he said finally. "None of us did. After Mother died, Father turned all his energy to raising us, to teaching us to work together, to survive. There was no talk of wives or families, only of the 7 of us carrying on his legacy. Building something that lasts," Emma recalled his earlier words. Abraham nodded. When he found Redemption, he saw what others didn't: potential. Not just for a town, but for a future where his sons could build something together. "It's a beautiful vision," Emma said softly. "It was incomplete," Abraham replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Until you arrived." For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of Abraham's words hanging between them. Emma's heart beat quickly in her chest, aware of how close he sat, of the intensity in his gaze when he looked at her. "Abraham," she said finally, "when you offered marriage, was it only for protection?" He looked down at his hands, enormous, calloused from years of hard work, yet capable of such gentleness when handling delicate things. "It started that way," he admitted. "When you first arrived, so determined to face your circumstances alone, I admired your courage. But I only saw the practicality of the situation: a woman in need of protection, a town in need of a teacher." "And now?" Emma asked softly. Abraham raised his eyes to meet hers. "Now I see you, Emma, not just what you can provide for Redemption, but who you are. Your kindness, your patience with 7 rough men who can barely write their own names, the way you sing to yourself when you think no one's listening, how you always save the heel of the bread for last because it's your favorite part." Emma felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't realized he had noticed such small details about her. "I'm not a man of fancy words," Abraham continued, "but if you were to choose me as your husband, it wouldn't be just duty. Not for me." The simple honesty of his declaration moved her deeply. This wasn't the passionate courtship she had once imagined, but there was something profound in its straightforwardness, a solid foundation upon which something genuine could grow. I don't expect you to feel the same, he added quickly. The arrangement would still stand on practical terms. The baby would have my name, and you would have the protection of being a married woman. But beyond that, Emma reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his. The contrast was striking, her slender fingers barely spanning the width of his palm. I can't make any promises about my heart, she said truthfully. I'm still mourning James, but I respect you, Abraham. I trust you, and I believe we could build a good life together for the baby and for ourselves. His fingers curled gently around hers, engulfing her hand completely, yet holding it with the utmost care. That's more than I dared hope for. The next morning, Emma woke to find a small envelope had been slipped beneath her door. Inside was a simple gold band, not new but well polished and clearly cherished. It was our mother's, Joshua explained when she came downstairs, the ring clutched in her palm. Abraham thought you might want something with history, with meaning. It's perfect, Emma said, deeply touched by the gesture. But I haven't said yes yet. Haven't you? Joshua's normally stern expression softened slightly. The way you look at him says otherwise. Emma felt herself blushing again. Is it that obvious? To anyone with eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, not accustomed to discussing such matters. Look, Abraham's the best of us, the strongest, the wisest. He deserves happiness after all he's done for this family. And you think I could make him happy? Joshua regarded her seriously. Already have. Never seen him smile so much as he has since you arrived. The brothers' acceptance of her potential marriage to Abraham touched Emma deeply. Far from resenting her presence or the complications she brought, they seemed genuinely pleased by the prospect of her becoming part of their family officially. That afternoon, as Emma conducted lessons in the schoolhouse, she found herself watching Abraham more closely. He sat at a desk that should have dwarfed a normal man, but seemed almost too small for his massive frame, his brow furrowed in concentration as he practiced writing a contract. There was something endearing about his determination, about the way this giant of a man approached the humble task of learning with such seriousness. Abraham, she said as the others filed out after the lesson, could you stay a moment? He remained seated, watching her with those steady eyes as she approached his desk. I've been thinking about your proposal, she began. You don't need to decide yet, he said quickly. There's still time before Harlow's deadline. Emma smiled. I've already decided. She held out her hand, his mother's ring resting in her palm. I would be honored to be your wife, Abraham Crane. For a moment he stared at the ring, then at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and hope. You're certain? As certain as anyone can be about the future, she replied honestly. I believe we can build something good together. His hands trembled slightly as he took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It was slightly loose. His mother had clearly been a larger woman, but the weight of it felt right, like a promise. We'll be married on Sunday, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If that suits you. Emma nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the step she was taking. She had come to redemption seeking solitude, a place to hide away from judgment and shame. Instead, she had found a future she couldn't have imagined. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community of brothers. That evening, they gathered for a celebration dinner, the atmosphere unusually festive. Even Joshua unbent enough to propose a toast to the couple. To Abraham and Emma, he said, raising his cup. May they build a life as strong as the foundations of redemption. Later, as Emma prepared for bed, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Elijah, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Made these for you, he said, extending a small wooden box. Inside were a pair of simple wooden rings, exquisitely carved with a pattern of intertwined leaves. For the ceremony, didn't know if Abraham would think of it. "They're beautiful," Emma said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Elijah." "Just wanted to say," he hesitated, struggling to find the words, "we're all happy about you and Abraham. You belong here now." The simple statement brought tears to her eyes. After months of feeling cast out, unwelcome, judged for her circumstances, the acceptance of these 7 brothers felt like coming home. Sunday dawned clear and bright. The brothers had transformed the hotel's dining room into a makeshift chapel, with fresh wildflowers decorating every surface and the chairs arranged to create an aisle. Emma wore her best dress, dark blue wool that strained slightly over her growing belly, with her hair carefully arranged and pinned with the few hairpins she had brought from her old life. As she descended the stairs, she found all 7 brothers waiting for her, dressed in their Sunday best. Abraham stood apart from the others, his massive frame somehow more imposing in his formal clothes, his dark beard trimmed neatly, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. Reverend Michaels, summoned from Coopersville for the occasion, conducted a simple ceremony. Emma spoke her vows clearly, her hand almost disappearing in Abraham's as they exchanged Elijah's wooden rings. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Abraham leaned down to place a gentle kiss on her forehead, a gesture of such tenderness that Emma felt her heart contract. "Mrs. Crane," he murmured, the name both strange and right on his lips. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. The brothers had prepared a feast and even opened bottles of wine saved for a special occasion. As twilight fell, Emma found herself seated beside her new husband on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint Redemption's weathered buildings in gold. "Happy?" Abraham asked quietly. "Yes," she replied, and was surprised to realize it was true. The circumstances were far from what she had once dreamed, but there was a rightness to this moment, to the solid presence of the man beside her, to the sense of belonging she felt in this half-rebuilt town. As darkness fell, a distant sound caught their attention, hoofbeats approaching from the direction of Coopersville. "Expecting anyone?" Emma asked, feeling a flutter of unease. Abraham stood, his expression growing watchful. "No, and riders at night rarely bring good news." He whistled sharply, summoning his brothers, who emerged from various buildings with the coordinated efficiency Emma had come to admire. They gathered around her protectively as the riders came into view, 3 men moving fast. "It's Dr. Jenkins," Emma said with relief, recognizing the middle figure. "But who's with her?" "Marshall," Abraham said grimly, identifying the badge that glinted in the fading light. "And that's Jeremiah Harlow's lawyer beside him." The doctor dismounted first, hurrying to Emma's side. "I came as soon as I could," she said breathlessly. "The Harlows have filed a formal complaint with the territorial authorities. They're challenging your right to live here." "On what grounds?" Abraham demanded. "Moral turpitude," the marshal replied, stepping forward. "Got a sworn statement that you're harboring an unmarried pregnant woman in improper circumstances." "My wife and I were married this very day," Abraham said firmly, his arm encircling Emma's shoulders. The marshal's eyebrows rose. "That's so? Convenient timing." "We have a marriage certificate," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt, "signed by Reverend Michaels of Coopersville." "And 7 witnesses," Joshua added, his tone daring the marshal to question further. The lawyer stepped forward, his thin face betraying his disappointment at finding their accusation neutralized. "Nevertheless, there are other issues to address. The legitimacy of your claim to this property, for instance." "Our claim is sound," Abraham stated. "We have the deeds, properly filed and registered." "Mr. Harlow has evidence suggesting otherwise," the lawyer countered. "This matter will be heard before Judge Wilson in Coopersville next week." I suggest you prepare your case carefully, Mr. Crane. There's more at stake than just this ghost town. As the three visitors departed to seek lodging for the night, Emma leaned against Abraham's solid strength, exhaustion and worry washing over her. "What did he mean, more at stake?" she asked quietly. Abraham's expression was grim. "He meant you. If they invalidate our claim to redemption, they could challenge everything, including our marriage." The week before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Abraham spent long hours with Gideon, poring over every document related to their claim on redemption: the original deed their father had purchased, tax receipts, improvement records, and letters from the Territorial Land Office confirming their ownership. "The Harlows must have something substantial," Gideon said one evening, rubbing his tired eyes. "They wouldn't risk bringing a marshal into this without believing they could win." Abraham nodded grimly. Father always suspected Jeremiah had connections in the territorial government. Might be calling in favors now. Emma's new role as Abraham's wife brought unexpected adjustments. They had agreed to maintain separate rooms until after the baby came, an arrangement that preserved her privacy while they navigated the early days of their unconventional marriage. Still, she found herself drawn to his steady presence, seeking him out in quiet moments between their preparations. On their third night as husband and wife, she found him alone on the hotel porch, smoking a pipe and staring at the stars. "Trouble sleeping?" he asked as she settled beside him, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill. "The baby is restless tonight," she replied, placing a hand on her rounded belly, "like he knows something's wrong." Abraham's large hand moved hesitantly toward her, stopping just short of touching. "May I?" Emma nodded, guiding his palm to the spot where the baby was kicking. The wonder that transformed his weathered face as he felt the movement beneath his hand made her heart tighten. "Strong," he murmured, "like his mother, or his new father," Emma said softly. Abraham's eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. "I never expected this," he admitted. "When Father brought us to redemption, I thought our lives were set, just the seven of us, rebuilding this town, carrying on his legacy. Never imagined having a wife, a child." "Are you disappointed?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Your life has changed dramatically because of me." "Disappointed?" He shook his head, his expression serious. "Emma, you and this baby are the greatest gifts I could never have imagined asking for." The simple sincerity of his words moved her deeply. This was not the passionate romance of her youthful dreams, but there was something profound in its quiet strength, like the foundations of the buildings they were restoring, solid and enduring. On the morning they were to depart for Coopersville, Dr. Jenkins insisted on examining Emma. "The journey will be difficult in your condition," she warned. 6 hours by wagon over rough trails. "I have to go," Emma insisted. "This hearing affects my future as much as Abraham's." The doctor sighed. "Then take frequent rest stops. Stay hydrated, and for heaven's sake, let your husband carry you if the trail gets too rough." The journey proved as difficult as predicted. Though Joshua had padded the wagon with every available blanket and cushion, each bump and jolt sent waves of discomfort through Emma's body. By the time they reached the halfway point, her back ached fiercely and she fought to hide her exhaustion. Abraham noticed anyway. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms and settled her on his lap for the remainder of the journey, his body absorbing the worst of the wagon's movements. "Better?" he asked, his voice rumbling against her ear where her head rested against his chest. "Much," she admitted, allowing herself to relax into his strength. They arrived in Coopersville by nightfall, securing rooms at the town's modest hotel. The other brothers would follow the next morning, bringing the final documents Gideon had been organizing. Emma was awakened before dawn by a sharp knock at their door. Abraham, who had been sleeping in a chair by the window, still maintaining the boundaries they had established, rose quickly to answer. Dr. Jenkins stood in the hallway, her expression grave. "You need to come quickly. There's been a fire." "Where?" Abraham demanded, already reaching for his coat. "The land office," the doctor replied. "Started in the middle of the night. They're saying all the records are destroyed." The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. The land office held the official copies of all deeds and claims in the territory, including the Cranes' documentation of ownership for redemption. "The Harlows," Abraham growled, his face darkening with fury. "No proof of that," Dr. Jenkins cautioned, "but it's certainly convenient timing." By the time they reached the land office, the building was little more than smoldering ruins. The marshal stood surveying the destruction, his expression grim. "Nothing saved?" Abraham asked, approaching him. "Nothing," the marshal confirmed. "Fire started in the records room, hot enough to melt the lockbox." "Convenient for anyone challenging established land claims," Abraham observed, his voice dangerously quiet. The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Careful with accusations, Crane. No evidence of foul play yet." "Yet," Abraham repeated pointedly. They returned to the hotel to find the other brothers had arrived ahead of schedule, having ridden through the night after spotting smoke on the horizon. "It's not a coincidence," Joshua insisted as they gathered in Abraham and Emma's room. "Harlow's behind this." "Proving it is another matter," Gideon said pragmatically. "We need to focus on the hearing. Without the official records, we're relying solely on our copies." "Which Harlow will claim are forgeries," Elijah added grimly. Emma watched the brothers' faces, seeing the same determination that had rebuilt half of redemption from ruins. These men didn't break under pressure. They grew stronger. "What do we do?" she asked. Abraham's eyes met hers across the room. "We fight, with everything we have." The territorial courthouse was packed the following morning. News of the land office fire had drawn curious onlookers, and it seemed every resident of Coopersville wanted to witness the proceedings. Emma sat beside Abraham at the front of the room, acutely aware of the stares directed at her pregnant figure and new wedding ring. Jeremiah Harlow and his sons occupied the opposite side, their expressions smug. The old man caught Emma's eye and smiled coldly, as if victory were already assured. Judge Wilson entered, a stern-faced man with spectacles and a reputation for strict adherence to the letter of the law. The room fell silent as he took his seat. "Harlow versus Crane," he announced. "Regarding disputed ownership of the settlement formerly known as Redemption, in light of the destruction of the territorial land records, both parties will present their surviving documentation for examination." Harlow's lawyer stepped forward first, presenting a deed dated 3 years earlier than the Cranes' claim, a document supposedly proving that Jeremiah Harlow had purchased Redemption and the surrounding land before the Cranes had arrived. "As you can see, Your Honor," the lawyer argued smoothly, "my client's claim predates the Cranes' alleged purchase. Furthermore, we have tax receipts and correspondence with the previous owner confirming the transaction." Abraham's jaw tightened as he studied the documents being presented. When it was their turn, he approached the bench with their own papers. The deed his father had obtained, letters, receipts, all carefully preserved. "Your Honor," he began, his deep voice filling the courtroom, "my father purchased Redemption legally and openly. We have lived there for 3 years, making substantial improvements to the property. The claim Mr. Harlow presents today is the first we've heard of it, despite his family living just 20 miles away." The judge examined both sets of documents carefully, his expression giving nothing away. After nearly an hour of deliberation, he looked up. "The documents presented by both parties appear authentic on initial examination," he declared. "However, given the suspicious timing of the land office fire and the contradictory nature of these claims, I cannot make a final determination today. I will require testimony from additional witnesses familiar with the history of the property. Emma felt a flutter of hope. A delay meant time to find more evidence, to build a stronger case. Court will reconvene in 1 week, Judge Wilson announced, during which time both parties are prohibited from taking any action regarding the disputed property. As they left the courthouse, Emma noticed Dr. Jenkins deep in conversation with an elderly man she didn't recognize. The doctor hurried over when she spotted them. "This is Walter Simmons," she said urgently. "He was the original surveyor for Redemption before the mine closed. He might have records that could help your case." Abraham's eyes lit with renewed determination. "Mr. Simmons, we'd be very grateful for any assistance you could provide." The old surveyor adjusted his spectacles, studying Abraham thoughtfully. "You're Josiah Crane's boy, aren't you?" Spitting image of him. He nodded decisively. "I've got some old maps and notes in my attic. Might show something interesting about those boundaries Harlow's claiming." For the first time since the fire, Emma felt a spark of genuine hope. As Abraham helped her into the wagon for the journey back to Redemption, she squeezed his hand. "We're going to win this," she said with quiet certainty. "I can feel it." Abraham's eyes met hers, warm with an emotion that made her heart skip. "With you beside me, Emma Crane, I believe we can do anything." Walter Simmons' attic proved to be a treasure trove of Redemption's history. The elderly surveyor had preserved maps, ledgers, and correspondence dating back to the town's founding. The Crane brothers and Emma spent hours sorting through dusty boxes, searching for anything that might strengthen their case. "Look at this," Gideon called out on their second day of searching. He held up a faded map with property boundaries clearly marked. "The original survey from when the mine first opened. Shows every plot in Redemption and 5 miles surrounding." Abraham studied it carefully, and no mention of Harlow ownership anywhere. "There's more," Walter said, producing a leather-bound ledger. "Records of every property transaction in Redemption from 1855 to 1880. The mine company kept meticulous accounts." As they compared dates and descriptions, a pattern emerged that confirmed their suspicions. Jeremiah Harlow had never owned Redemption or the surrounding land. His deed was a fabrication. "This proves it," Abraham said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Harlow forged that deed, probably after he learned we were rebuilding the town." But why go to such lengths, Emma wondered. Why not just offer to buy the land legitimately? Walter Simmons cleared his throat. Might have something to do with what's under that land. When all eyes turned to him, he continued. "Before the mine closed, there were rumors of a new silver vein discovered on the north edge of town. Nothing came of it. The company went bankrupt before they could explore further." "That's where our spring is located," Joshua said, realization dawning. "The water source Harlow claims to want for his cattle. Silver and water. 2 things worth killing for in this territory," Walter observed grimly. The revelation added urgency to their preparations. If Harlow knew about a potential silver vein, he wouldn't stop at legal challenges to claim Redemption. That evening, as they prepared to return to town, Emma felt a sharp pain low in her back. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table for support. Abraham was at her side instantly. "What is it? The baby?" "Just a twinge," she assured him, though the intensity had frightened her. Dr. Jenkins said to expect false contractions in these final weeks. His face creased with concern. "We should find her before heading back." Dr. Jenkins examined Emma in her hotel room, her experienced hands gentle but thorough. "Not labor," she confirmed finally, "but your body is preparing. The journey back to Redemption will be difficult. Are you certain you want to make it?" "I have to," Emma insisted. "Our home is there." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly at the word "our," but she nodded. Then you'll travel in the most comfortable wagon with frequent stops. And Mr. Crane, she fixed Abraham with a stern look, you'll watch her carefully. Any signs of regular pains, bleeding, or her water breaking, you turn right around and bring her back here. Abraham nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am. The journey back was slower than their trip to Coopersville, with Abraham insisting on stops every hour for Emma to rest and walk briefly. By the time Redemption's weathered buildings appeared on the horizon, the sun was setting, painting the ghost town in shades of gold and amber. Looks different, doesn't it? Emma murmured, nestled against Abraham's side on the wagon seat. How so? When I first arrived, I saw only emptiness. Now I see home. His arm tightened around her shoulders. It's become that for all of us. More than just buildings my father wanted to restore. A real home. As they drew closer, however, something seemed wrong. No smoke rose from the chimneys. No lanterns glowed in the windows. Too quiet, Joshua said from the wagon behind them, his voice tense. Abraham pulled their wagon to a stop at the edge of town. Stay here with Emma, he instructed Daniel and Caleb. The rest of us will check the buildings. Emma watched anxiously as Abraham, Joshua, Elijah, and Gideon moved cautiously into town, spreading out to cover more ground. Minutes stretched painfully until Abraham emerged from the hotel, waving them forward. No one's here, he reported as their wagon approached, but they've been busy while we were gone. Inside the hotel, furniture had been overturned, windows broken. The schoolhouse had suffered worse. Desks splintered, books torn, the bell ripped from its tower. Each building in Redemption showed similar destruction. Animals, Joshua growled, kicking at the broken remains of a chair. Trying to drive us out. Emma moved slowly through the schoolhouse, heart aching at the deliberate devastation. Her desk had been smashed to pieces, the lock forced open and all their contracts and documents scattered. As she bent to gather the papers, another pain seized her, sharper than before. Abraham caught her arm, steadying her. Emma? I'm fine, she insisted, though fear flickered through her. The baby wasn't due for nearly 3 weeks. That night, they gathered in the hotel's dining room, the only space quickly restored to order. The mood was somber but determined as they planned their next steps. We repair what we can before the hearing, Abraham decided. Show the judge we're not abandoning Redemption no matter what Harlow does. What about Emma? Matthew asked, his concern evident. She shouldn't be here with the baby coming soon. I'm staying, Emma stated firmly before Abraham could respond. This is my home too. Our child will be born in Redemption. Abraham's expression was torn between pride and worry. At least let us move your things to a safer location. The hotel is too vulnerable if the Harlows return. They decided on the old mine office, a solid stone building set slightly apart from the rest of town, with thick walls and a defensible position on higher ground. Elijah and Matthew worked through the night to make it habitable, moving a bed and necessities from the hotel. As dawn broke, Emma stood with Abraham on the porch of their new temporary home, surveying the damaged town below. We'll rebuild, he promised, again and again if necessary. I know, she said, leaning against his solid strength. The Harlows don't understand what they're fighting against. This isn't just about land or silver or water, it's about family, home. Abraham's arm encircled her waist, his hand resting protectively over their child. I never thought I'd have either, he admitted. After Mother died, Father poured everything into keeping us together, teaching us to survive. There was no talk of wives or children, just the 7 of us against the world. And now? His eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. Now I can't imagine a future without you in it. You and our child. The simple declaration, spoken in his deep, steady voice, filled Emma with a warmth that pushed away the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her. This man, this giant of a husband she had married for practical reasons, had become essential to her happiness in ways she hadn't anticipated. As the brothers set to work repairing the damage below, Emma felt another pain ripple through her, stronger, more insistent. She gripped the porch railing, breathing through it as Dr. Jenkins had taught her. Abraham noticed immediately. "Emma, is it time?" "No," she assured him, though with less certainty than before. "Just practice contractions. Dr. Jenkins said they could come and go for weeks before the real thing." He studied her face, clearly unconvinced. "I'm sending Daniel for the doctor today, just to be safe." Emma didn't argue. Something told her the baby might not wait the full 3 weeks after all. As if sensing the precarious situation, the child was preparing to arrive in time for the final confrontation with the Harlows. As she watched Abraham join his brothers in Redemption's main street, Emma placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong movements within. "Soon," she whispered to her child. "Soon you'll meet your father, the one who chose you, who's fighting for your future, and your 6 uncles who would move mountains to keep you safe." Another pain gripped her, unmistakably stronger than the last. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The battle for redemption was reaching its climax, in more ways than one. By nightfall, Emma could no longer deny what was happening. Her contractions were coming regularly, growing stronger with each passing hour. She had experienced enough false alarms to recognize the difference. This was the real beginning of labor. Abraham hovered anxiously nearby, his massive frame making the mine office seem even smaller than it was. The brothers had transformed the space throughout the day, bringing clean linens, fresh water, and anything else Emma might need. "Daniel should have reached Coopersville by now," Abraham said, pacing the small room. "Dr. Jenkins will come as soon as she can." Emma nodded, gripping the edge of the bed as another contraction built. "There's time yet," she assured him when it passed. "First babies often take a full day or more." Whether true or wishful thinking, her words seemed to calm him slightly. He sat beside her, taking her small hand in his enormous one. "I don't know much about birthing," he admitted. "Never thought I'd need to." "Neither did I," Emma said with a small smile. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. We'll manage." As the night deepened, Emma walked slowly around the room between contractions, leaning on Abraham's arm for support. The pain was intensifying, but still manageable, waves that crested and receded, giving her time to recover between them. Joshua appeared at the door around midnight, his expression grave. "Riders approaching from the east," he reported, "at least 10 of them." Abraham's face hardened. "Harlows. They wouldn't attack now, would they?" Emma asked, alarmed. "Not at night, not with the hearing in 2 days." "A man who burns land records and vandalizes a schoolhouse won't be constrained by legal niceties," Abraham replied grimly. He turned to Joshua. "Get everyone in position. We'll defend the town like we planned." The brothers had prepared for this possibility, fortifying key buildings and establishing clear fields of fire. But they had expected to have Emma safely away in Coopersville before any confrontation. "Go," Emma urged when Abraham hesitated. "I'm fine for now. The baby won't come for hours yet." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "Call if anything changes. Caleb will stay within earshot." After he left, Emma continued her slow pacing, pausing every few minutes as contractions seized her. Through the small window she could see movement in the town below as the brothers took their positions. Lanterns flickered briefly, then were extinguished, leaving Redemption in darkness, except for the moonlight silvering the weathered buildings. The riders arrived with a thunder of hooves, their approach making no pretense at stealth. From her elevated position, Emma could see Jeremiah Harlow at their head, his silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. Beside him rode his 5 sons, along with what appeared to be hired guns, rough men with rifles visible even at a distance. "Crane!" Harlow's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Show yourself. We have business to settle." For a long moment, nothing moved in the darkened town. Then Abraham emerged from the shadows, standing alone in the center of the main street. Even from a distance, his massive figure was unmistakable. "You're trespassing, Harlow," his deep voice boomed. "This is private property." Harlow laughed, the sound ugly in the quiet night. "Not for much longer. Judge Wilson's received some new evidence that might interest you." "More forgeries?" Abraham's tone was contemptuous. "We found the original survey maps and transaction records. Your claim won't stand." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Harlow's face, visible even from Emma's vantage point. But he recovered quickly. "Doesn't matter now. We're not waiting for the law to sort this out." 7 against 11, Abraham observed calmly. "Poor odds for you, Harlow." As if on cue, his brothers emerged from various buildings, Joshua from the smithy, Elijah from the general store, Gideon and Matthew from opposite ends of the hotel, Daniel from the stable. Even young Caleb appeared, having left his post near Emma only briefly to present a united front. The sight was impressive. 7 giants standing firm against Harlow's ragtag force, their solidarity palpable even across the distance. A contraction gripped Emma, stronger than any before, forcing her to grip the windowsill as she watched the confrontation unfold. Something had changed. The pain was different, more insistent, demanding her full attention. Below, Harlow's men shifted uneasily, clearly reconsidering the wisdom of a direct assault against the 7 enormous brothers. "This land has silver under it," Harlow said, playing his final card, "worth 10 times what I offered you. We could work together, split the profits." "Not interested," Abraham replied flatly. "This is our home, not a business opportunity." "Your home?" Harlow's voice dripped with derision. "A half-rebuilt ghost town? What kind of life is that for a family? For a child?" Emma saw Abraham's stance change subtly at the mention of their child, a tension that suggested Harlow had struck a nerve. "A good life," Abraham answered, his voice steady despite the provocation. "Built on honesty and hard work, not theft and intimidation." Harlow's face contorted with rage. "You self-righteous fool, your father was the same way, too principled to see an opportunity when it was staring him in the face." "My father saw what mattered," Abraham countered. "Family, legacy, things you wouldn't understand, Harlow." The older man's control snapped. "Enough talk. Take them." What happened next unfolded with nightmarish clarity. Harlow's men raised their rifles, but before they could fire, the Crane brothers moved with surprising speed for men their size. Joshua and Elijah overturned a wagon, creating cover as the first shots rang out. Gideon and Matthew circled from the sides, while Daniel and Caleb darted between buildings, making themselves difficult targets. Abraham charged directly at Jeremiah Harlow, seemingly oblivious to the bullets kicking up dust around his feet. He reached the older man's horse in seconds, yanking Harlow from the saddle with one powerful hand. Emma wanted to look away but couldn't. Below her, the town erupted into chaos, shouts, gunfire, the sounds of struggle. She saw Abraham grappling with Harlow, saw Joshua take a grazing shot to the shoulder but continue fighting, saw Elijah disarm 2 men with methodical efficiency. Another contraction seized her, this one so powerful she cried out, doubling over with the force of it. As it receded, she felt a rush of warm fluid down her legs. Her water had broken. The baby was coming in earnest now. "Caleb," she called out, but her voice was lost in the commotion below. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as another contraction followed quickly on the heels of the last. She had expected hours more of early labor, time for Dr. Jenkins to arrive. Instead, her body was accelerating the process, demanding she bring this child into the world now in the midst of a battle for their home. Moving carefully to the bed, Emma arranged herself as best she could, remembering what little she knew about childbirth. The contractions were coming too fast, too hard. Something wasn't right. She needed help, but every man who could provide it was fighting for their lives below. Through the window, she could see the tide of battle turning in the brothers' favor. Their size, strength, and coordination were proving overwhelming even against superior numbers. Harlow's hired guns were retreating, leaving the family patriarch and his sons to face the consequences of their scheme. As Abraham pinned Jeremiah Harlow against the wall of the general store, the old man finally broke. "It was supposed to be mine," he shouted, his face contorted with decades of bitterness. "That silver vein was my discovery, but the mine company claimed it all, pushed me out without a cent." "So you waited 20 years to steal it back," Abraham growled. "Forged documents, burned records, threatened innocent people." "Your father knew," Harlow gasped as Abraham's grip tightened. "He found out I was surveying the boundaries. That's why he confronted me that day, why we fought." A terrible stillness came over Abraham's face. "You killed him." "It was an accident," Harlow insisted. "He fell and hit his head during our struggle. I never meant—" A scream from the mine office cut through the night, silencing every man in the street. Emma's scream, high and desperate. Abraham's head snapped up, his focus instantly shifting from vengeance to something far more urgent. He released Harlow, who slumped to the ground, and ran toward the mine office with incredible speed for a man his size. "Emma," he shouted, taking the steps 3 at a time. She was on the bed, her face contorted with pain, her hands clutching her belly. "The baby," she gasped between contractions. "Coming too fast. Something's wrong." Abraham froze for an instant, terror unlike anything he'd ever known washing over him. He had faced armed men, wild animals, natural disasters, but nothing had prepared him for this. Then training took over. Not medical training, but the mindset his father had instilled in him from childhood. Assess, decide, act. "Joshua," he bellowed out the window, "get water boiling. Elijah, clean cloths. Matthew, find my mother's birthing kit in the trunk at the hotel." Turning back to Emma, he took her hand and met her frightened eyes with steady determination. "I'm here," he said simply. "We'll do this together." Time lost all meaning as Emma's labor intensified. The brothers moved with surprising efficiency, bringing water, clean linens, and whatever else Abraham requested. Joshua, his wounded shoulder hastily bandaged, stood guard at the door, ensuring no Harlow would disturb them. The others secured the prisoners below, then took up positions around the mine office, forming a protective circle around the small building where new life struggled to enter the world. Inside, Abraham knelt beside the bed, his massive hands gentle as he wiped sweat from Emma's brow. His mother's birthing kit, preserved all these years in a cedar trunk, lay open nearby, its contents arranged neatly by Elijah, who had the steadiest hands among them. "I can see the head," Abraham said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "You're doing wonderfully, Emma. Just a little more." Emma had never imagined her child would enter the world like this. In a half-abandoned mining town, with no doctor, delivered by the hands of a husband she had married for convenience but now couldn't imagine living without. Another contraction seized her, and she pushed with all her remaining strength. "That's it," Abraham encouraged. "Once more." With a final desperate effort, Emma felt the baby slip free. For one terrifying moment, silence filled the room. Then came the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, a strong, indignant cry as her child took his first breath. "A boy," Abraham whispered, awe transforming his weathered face as he cradled the tiny infant in his enormous hands. A perfect, healthy boy. Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks as Abraham placed their son on her chest. The baby's cries quieted as she touched his face, counting fingers and toes with trembling hands, marveling at the miracle they had created. Not just the child, but the family that had formed around him, protecting him before he even drew breath. Abraham leaned down, pressing his forehead gently to hers. "You did it," he murmured. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon when they heard the sound of approaching horses. Abraham tensed, moving protectively between Emma and the door, but Joshua's voice called out a moment later. "It's Dr. Jenkins and the marshal." The doctor burst into the room, her traveling bag clutched in one hand, her expression shifting from concern to relief as she took in the scene. "I see I'm late to the party," she said, setting down her bag and moving immediately to Emma's side. "Let me check both of you." As Dr. Jenkins examined mother and child, the marshal appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Quite a situation you have here, Crane," he said. 5 Harlows and 3 hired guns in custody. Jeremiah confessed to everything: the forged deed, the land office fire, even your father's death. Abraham nodded, unsurprised. "Will it be enough?" "More than enough," the marshal confirmed. "Judge Wilson's already signed the papers confirming your claim to redemption. The Harlow lands will likely be forfeit as well, once the territorial court hears the full story." Emma watched Abraham's face as the news sank in. Vindication for his father, security for their future, justice finally served. Yet there was no triumph in his expression, only quiet relief and something deeper, as he looked back at her and their son. "Thank you, Marshal," he said simply. "But if you'll excuse me, I have more important matters to attend to now." The doctor completed her examination with a satisfied nod. "Mother and baby are doing remarkably well, considering the circumstances. You did good work here, Mr. Crane." Abraham shook his head. "Emma did the work. I just caught." Dr. Jenkins smiled. "Don't sell yourself short. Many men would have fallen apart under such pressure." As the doctor stepped out to give them a moment alone, Emma reached for Abraham's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He knelt beside the bed, his eyes level with hers. "What shall we name him?" Emma had been considering names for months, but in this moment only one seemed right. "Josiah," she said, "after your father, the man who taught you to build something that lasts." Emotion washed over Abraham's face. Joy, grief, gratitude all mingled together. "Josiah James," he suggested softly, to honor his first father as well. Fresh tears filled Emma's eyes at this unexpected gesture. "Josiah James Crane," she agreed. "A name with history, with meaning." A soft knock at the door heralded the arrival of the other brothers, filing in one by one to meet their nephew. Their enormous frames crowded the small room, but they moved with careful precision, mindful of the precious new life in their midst. "He's so small," Caleb marveled, his finger engulfed by the baby's tiny hand. "But strong," Elijah observed. "Look at that grip." 7 uncles to teach him everything he needs to know, Gideon said proudly, "and 1 mother to make sure you don't teach him too much too soon," Emma added with a tired smile. As the brothers cooed over the baby, Abraham slipped outside onto the small porch of the mine office. The sun had fully risen now, illuminating redemption in the clear light of a new day. The damage from the Harlow's vandalism was still evident, but already he could see how it would be repaired, how the town would rise again, stronger than before. Below, the marshal and his deputies were loading the Harlows into wagons for the journey to the territorial prison. Jeremiah caught Abraham's eye as they passed, his face haggard with defeat. For a moment, the two men regarded each other. One who had spent decades consumed by greed and vengeance, the other who had chosen to build rather than destroy. Abraham felt no triumph, only a profound sense of completion. His father's vision, his brother's labor, Emma's courage, all had converged to create something precious and enduring. Dr. Jenkins joined him on the porch, lighting a cigarette. "Remarkable woman you married," she observed. "Coming here alone in her condition, facing down the Harlows, giving birth in the middle of a gunfight. One might almost think she planned it that way." Abraham smiled. "She's full of surprises. And you?" The doctor gave him a shrewd look. "A marriage of convenience that turned into something more?" "The most convenient thing I ever did," Abraham admitted. "Found everything I never knew I was looking for." 3 months later, Emma stood on the steps of the newly rebuilt schoolhouse, baby Josiah sleeping peacefully in a sling across her chest. Around her, redemption had transformed. New buildings stood alongside the renovated original structures. Gardens flourished behind picket fences. A proper church bell rang out each Sunday. Most remarkably, new faces had begun to appear, families drawn by word of the silver mine that the Crane brothers had opened with careful, sustainable practices, unlike the rapacious methods of the original company. The 7 brothers still dominated the landscape with their massive presence, but they moved through town with the quiet confidence of men who had found their purpose. Joshua oversaw security for the growing community. Elijah had opened a thriving furniture business. Gideon served as town clerk and historian. Matthew's bakery filled the morning air with delicious smells. Daniel managed the stables and livestock. Caleb, always the most social, ran the hotel that had become Redemption's gathering place. And Abraham, her husband in truth now as well as name, balanced his role as mine manager with that of devoted father. Each evening he returned home with the day's dust still on his clothes, eager to hold his son and spend time with his wife. As Emma prepared to ring the bell for the first official school day in the new building, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in 1 year. She had fled to a ghost town seeking isolation, a place to hide her shame and fear. Instead, she had found 7 brothers who had vowed to protect her forever, and one who had given her his heart along with his name. Abraham appeared at the corner right on time to witness this milestone. He climbed the steps to stand beside her, one arm circling her waist as he bent to kiss his son's head. "Ready?" he asked. Emma reached for the bell rope, her wedding ring catching the sunlight. "Ready?" As the clear tone rang out across Redemption, calling the town's first students to their lessons, Emma leaned into her husband's solid strength and felt the rightness of their unlikely family. She had come seeking a ghost town in which to disappear. What she had found instead was a home, a purpose, and 7 giant brothers who had taught her the true meaning of redemption.